Prince Alexander walked through the grand palace halls with measured steps, his young face showing no emotion. At only 16, he had learned to hide his feelings well. The marble floors echoed under his polished boots as servants bowed deeply when he passed. But today was different. Today, he carried a terrible secret that could change everything. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the royal corridors. Alexander's mind raced as he remembered what he had witnessed the night before. Hidden behind thick curtains in his father's study, he had watched in horror as someone he trusted completely betrayed the royal family. The person had been copying important documents and passing secret information to enemies of the kingdom. His heart pounded as he thought about what this meant. The kingdom was in danger, and he was the only one who knew the truth. But who could he tell? Who could he trust when the traitor was someone so close to the royal family that they had access to the most private rooms in the palace? Alexander's hands trembled slightly as he touched the small golden pin on his jacket. This pin was more than just decoration. It was part of an ancient royal code that his grandfather had taught him years ago. The code was known only to a few trusted members of the royal guard. By positioning the pin in different ways, he could send secret messages without speaking a word. As he entered the main courtyard, Alexander spotted Captain Marcus of the royal guard. The captain was a tall, strong man with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He had protected the royal family for over 20 years and was one of the few people the young prince completely trusted. Alexander walked closer to where Captain Marcus stood with other guards. His heart beat faster as he prepared to use the secret signal. Everything depended on this moment. If the captain understood the message, help would come quickly. If not, the traitor might discover that Alexander knew their secret, putting the entire royal family in terrible danger. The young prince stopped near a fountain where several guards were stationed. Pretending to adjust his jacket, he carefully moved his golden pin to a specific position. The pin now pointed downward at exactly 45 degrees with its small ruby facing east. This was the ancient signal that meant immediate danger to the royal family. Captain Marcus glanced over and noticed the prince's presence. His experienced eyes quickly spotted the position of the golden pin. The captain's face remained calm, but Alexander saw his jaw tighten slightly. The message had been received and understood. Without drawing attention to himself, Captain Marcus began to move. He whispered quick orders to nearby guards, who then spread out across the courtyard. To anyone watching, it looked like a normal change of guard positions. But Alexander knew better. The royal guard was now on high alert, ready to act on whatever threat the prince had discovered. Alexander felt a mix of relief and fear wash over him. Relief because he was no longer alone with his dangerous secret. Fear because he knew the real danger was just beginning. The traitor was still somewhere in the palace, probably planning their next move. And now, thanks to his signal, a deadly game of cat and mouse was about to begin. The young prince forced himself to act normally as he continued his walk through the palace. But inside, he was preparing for what might be the most dangerous day of his young life. The secret signal had been sent, and there was no turning back now. Captain Marcus moved through the palace like a shadow, his mind racing with possibilities. The prince's signal was clear, but the captain needed more information. He had to be careful not to alert anyone that something was wrong while gathering his most trusted men. In a small room behind the armory, Marcus quietly assembled 5 of his best guards. These men had been with him for years, and he would trust them with his life. They stood in a tight circle as he explained the situation in hushed tones. "The prince has sent the danger signal," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. "Someone inside the palace is working against the royal family. We need to watch everyone, including people we think we can trust." The traitor could be anyone. The guards nodded grimly. They all understood how serious this was. If enemies had someone inside the palace, the king, queen, and prince were all in immediate danger. The guards quickly divided into pairs and spread throughout the palace, each watching different areas and different people. Meanwhile, Prince Alexander tried to continue his normal daily routine. He attended his morning lessons with his tutor, Master William, but found it impossible to concentrate. Every sound made him jump. Every servant who entered the room made him wonder if they were the traitor he had seen the night before. Master William was an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle voice. He had been teaching Alexander for 5 years, and noticed immediately that something was wrong. "Your Highness, you seem distracted today," Perhaps we should focus on something more interesting than mathematics. Alexander forced a smile and nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He kept glancing toward the door, wondering if Captain Marcus had found any clues yet. Time seemed to move incredibly slowly as he waited for news. In another part of the palace, the real traitor was becoming nervous. Lord Edmund, the king's own advisor and trusted friend for over 15 years, had noticed the subtle changes in the guard positions. His sharp mind quickly realized that something had shifted in the palace's security. Lord Edmund had been selling royal secrets to enemy kingdoms for months, earning huge amounts of gold for information about military plans and trade agreements. He thought he had been clever enough to avoid detection, but now he sensed danger closing in around him. The advisor spent the morning watching the guards carefully, trying to determine what had changed. He noticed Captain Marcus speaking quietly with certain guards and saw how they were positioning themselves to watch specific areas of the palace. Fear began to grow in his chest as he realized someone might suspect him. During lunch, Lord Edmund sat at the royal table as usual, making pleasant conversation with the king and queen. But his eyes constantly moved around the room, watching the guards and looking for any signs that his secret activities had been discovered. He noticed how Prince Alexander seemed quiet and nervous, barely touching his food. "Alexander, my boy, you're not eating," the king said with concern. "Are you feeling well?" The prince looked up quickly, startled by his father's voice. "I'm fine, father. Just thinking about my studies." Lord Edmund studied the young prince's face carefully. Something about the boy's behavior seemed strange, almost fearful. A terrible thought began to form in the advisor's mind. Could the prince have discovered something? Had someone seen him copying documents the night before? As lunch continued, Lord Edmund became more and more convinced that his secret was no longer safe. He noticed how certain guards seemed to be watching him more closely than usual. Captain Marcus appeared in the dining room twice during the meal, something that rarely happened. The advisor's mind began working quickly, planning his next moves. If his cover was blown, he needed to act fast. He had contacts outside the palace who could help him escape. But first he needed to complete one final task. Tonight, he was supposed to deliver the most valuable information yet, details about the kingdom's secret military defenses. But now everything had changed. Instead of a simple handoff of information, tonight might become a desperate fight for survival. Lord Edmund realized he would have to make a choice: run away immediately and lose a fortune in gold, or take a huge risk and try to complete his mission. As the royal family finished their lunch and began to leave the dining room, Lord Edmund made his decision. He would stay and try to get the military documents tonight. But first he needed to find out exactly how much the prince knew, and whether the guards were really watching him. The deadly game was becoming more dangerous by the hour, and everyone involved was starting to realize that before the day was over, someone would not survive. As afternoon shadows grew longer across the palace floors, Captain Marcus knew he needed to speak with Prince Alexander privately. He had been watching all day, and his suspicions were beginning to focus on several people. But he needed to know exactly what the prince had seen before making any arrests. The captain found Alexander in the royal library, sitting alone among tall shelves filled with ancient books. The prince looked up nervously when Marcus approached, his young face showing the strain of carrying such a heavy secret. "Your Highness," Marcus said quietly, making sure no one else could hear them. "We need to talk about your signal this morning. Can you tell me what you saw?" Alexander's hands shook slightly as he closed the book he had been pretending to read. For a moment he hesitated, wondering if he should reveal everything, but looking into Captain Marcus's honest eyes, he knew he had made the right choice in trusting this man. "Last night I couldn't sleep," Alexander whispered. "I went to Father's study to get a book, but I heard voices inside. I hid behind the curtains and watched as someone was copying important documents from Father's desk." Captain Marcus leaned closer, his expression growing more serious. "Did you see who it was?" The prince nodded slowly, his voice barely audible. It was Lord Edmund. He was making copies of the military defense plans and putting them in a leather bag. "I watched him for almost an hour." The captain's face hardened. Lord Edmund had been like family to the king for years. This betrayal would break the king's heart, but more importantly, it put the entire kingdom at risk. The military plans Edmund had stolen contained information about secret tunnels under the palace and weak points in the city's defenses. "Your Highness," You did the right thing by signaling me, Marcus said firmly. But now we face a very dangerous situation. Lord Edmund is clever and desperate. If he realizes we know about his betrayal, he might do something drastic to protect himself. Meanwhile, in his private chambers, Lord Edmund was preparing for the evening ahead. He had spent the afternoon carefully watching the guards and had confirmed his worst fears. Several guards were definitely following him, and their positions around the palace had changed, in ways that suggested they were preparing for trouble. The advisor opened a secret compartment in his wardrobe and pulled out a small dagger with a poisoned blade. He had hoped never to use this weapon, but circumstances were forcing his hand. Tonight, he would get those military documents, even if it meant fighting his way out of the palace. Edmund also prepared a special powder that, when mixed with wine, would make someone fall into a deep sleep for hours. His plan was becoming clearer. If the guards were watching him too closely, he would need to create a distraction that would draw them away from the areas he needed to access. Back in the library, Captain Marcus was explaining his plan to Prince Alexander. Tonight we will set a trap for Lord Edmund. My men will watch the study where the military documents are kept. When he tries to steal them, we will catch him in the act. Alexander felt both excited and terrified. What if he sees the trap and tries to escape? What if he hurts someone? That's why I need you to stay in your room tonight, Your Highness, Marcus replied seriously. Lock your door and don't come out for any reason until I personally come to get you in the morning. Lord Edmund is dangerous, and if he realizes you witnessed his betrayal, he might try to silence you permanently. The thought sent chills down Alexander's spine. He had always liked Lord Edmund, who had often told him interesting stories and brought him gifts from his travels. To think that this kind man was actually a deadly traitor seemed impossible. As evening approached, servants began lighting candles throughout the palace. The normal sounds of daily life continued, but underneath the surface, tension was building. Guards moved quietly to their assigned positions, and Captain Marcus made final preparations for the trap that would either capture a traitor or result in a deadly confrontation. Lord Edmund ate dinner with the royal family as usual, smiling and making pleasant conversation while secretly studying everyone's behavior. He noticed that Prince Alexander barely spoke and seemed to avoid looking at him directly. This convinced Edmund that the boy definitely knew something dangerous. After dinner, Edmund excused himself early, claiming he had work to complete in his chambers. But instead of going to his room, he made his way through hidden passages that few people knew existed. These secret corridors would allow him to reach the king's study without being seen by the guards who were watching the main hallways. As midnight approached, the palace grew quiet. Most servants had finished their work and gone to their quarters. The only sounds were the soft footsteps of guards making their regular patrols and the distant hooting of owls in the royal gardens. In his locked room, Prince Alexander lay awake in bed listening to every sound. He knew that somewhere in the darkness below, a dangerous game was about to begin. Before morning came, the truth would finally be revealed, and the kingdom would either be saved or face its greatest crisis in years. The palace clock tower chimed midnight as Lord Edmund crept through the secret passage behind the walls. His heart pounded with each careful step, knowing that discovery would mean death for treason. The narrow corridor was completely dark, forcing him to feel his way along the cold stone walls with his fingertips. Edmund had used these hidden passages many times before during his months of betrayal, but tonight felt different. Tonight he could sense danger waiting for him. Still, the thought of the enormous payment he would receive for the military documents pushed him forward into the darkness. Captain Marcus stood hidden in an alcove near the king's study, his hand resting on his sword handle. Two of his most trusted guards were positioned at the main entrances to the room, while others watched the corridors leading to the study. They had been waiting for hours, but Marcus knew that patience was essential for catching a clever traitor like Edmund. The captain had considered simply arresting Edmund earlier, but he needed solid proof of the betrayal to convince the king. Catching Edmund in the act of stealing military secrets would provide undeniable evidence that would protect the kingdom and prevent any doubt about the advisor's guilt. Inside the study, moonlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the king's massive oak desk where the most important documents in the kingdom were kept. The military defense plans lay in a locked drawer, exactly where Edmund expected to find them. But what the traitor didn't know was that Captain Marcus had replaced the real documents with fake ones designed to trap him. Edmund reached the hidden door that opened into the study. He pressed his ear against the wood, listening carefully for any sounds that might indicate guards were present. Hearing nothing, he slowly turned the secret handle and pushed the door open just enough to peer into the room. The study appeared empty and peaceful in the moonlight. Edmund waited several more minutes, watching for any movement or signs of a trap. His experience as a spy had taught him to be extremely careful, but his greed for gold was making him impatient to complete this final theft. Finally, Edmund stepped into the study and moved silently toward the king's desk. His soft leather shoes made no sound on the thick carpet as he approached the drawer where the military plans were kept. He pulled out a set of special tools and began working on the lock, his skilled fingers making quick progress. From his hiding place, Captain Marcus watched Edmund's every move. The captain's jaw tightened with anger as he saw the man who had eaten at the king's table and been trusted like family stealing secrets that could destroy the kingdom. But Marcus forced himself to wait until Edmund actually took the documents before revealing himself. The lock clicked open, and Edmund smiled with satisfaction as he pulled out the leather folder containing what he believed were the real military plans. He opened the folder briefly to confirm the documents were inside, then carefully placed them in his coat pocket. Just as Edmund turned to leave, Captain Marcus stepped out of the shadows. "Going somewhere, Lord Edmund?" The traitor froze, his face going pale in the moonlight. For a moment, neither man moved as they stared at each other across the room. Then Edmund's hand slowly moved toward the poisoned dagger hidden under his coat. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Marcus said calmly, drawing his sword with lightning speed. "The room is surrounded and you have nowhere to run." Edmund's mind raced as he calculated his chances of escape. The secret passage was only a few steps away, but he would have to get past Captain Marcus first. The advisor was smaller and older than the captain, but he was desperate and had nothing left to lose. "You don't understand," Edmund said, trying to sound reasonable. "I was just checking these documents for the king. There's been concern about security and I was asked to review them." Marcus laughed grimly. "At midnight? Through a secret passage? With lockpicking tools? Lord Edmund, your lies won't work anymore. Prince Alexander saw you stealing documents last night." The mention of the prince's name made Edmund's blood run cold. He realized that his fears had been correct. The boy had discovered his secret activities. Now there was only one way out of this situation, and it involved violence. "I'm sorry you found out," Edmund said quietly, his hand gripping the dagger handle. "I really am sorry it has to end this way." Before Marcus could react, Edmund threw a small glass bottle at the floor near the captain's feet. The bottle shattered, releasing a cloud of sleeping powder that immediately filled the air around them. Marcus held his breath and tried to move away, but some of the powder reached his lungs, making him dizzy and weak. Taking advantage of the captain's confusion, Edmund drew his poisoned dagger and lunged forward. The two men crashed together, fighting desperately in the moonlit study while the fate of the kingdom hung in the balance. The sleeping powder made Captain Marcus feel weak and confused, but years of training helped him fight through the dizziness. As Edmund's poisoned dagger swept toward his chest, Marcus managed to knock the advisor's arm aside with his sword handle. The blade missed his heart by inches, instead cutting through his leather armor and leaving a shallow wound on his shoulder. Edmund stumbled backward, surprised that his attack had failed. The sleeping powder was supposed to knock the captain unconscious within seconds, but Marcus was still standing and fighting. Fear replaced confidence on the traitor's face as he realized his plan was falling apart. "Guards," Marcus shouted, his voice echoing through the palace corridors despite his weakened condition. "The study, now!" Heavy footsteps immediately thundered through the hallways as guards rushed toward the king's study from multiple directions. Edmund knew he had only moments before the room would be filled with armed men. His escape route through the secret passage was his only hope, but Captain Marcus stood between him and the hidden door. The advisor decided to make one final desperate attack. He pulled a second dagger from his boot and charged at Marcus with both weapons raised. But the captain, even weakened by the powder, was far more skilled in combat than the scholarly advisor. Marcus stepped aside at the last moment and brought his sword handle down hard on Edmund's wrist. The impact forced the traitor to drop one dagger, and Marcus quickly kicked the other weapon away across the room. Now Edmund was defenseless, trapped between the captain and the approaching guards. "It's over, Edmund," Marcus said, breathing heavily from the effects of the powder and the fight. "Surrender now, and perhaps the king will show mercy." But Lord Edmund was beyond rational thinking. Years of secret betrayal and the terror of being caught had driven him to the edge of madness. Instead of surrendering, he made a sudden dash for the window, apparently planning to jump 3 stories to the courtyard below rather than face execution for treason. Marcus lunged forward and grabbed Edmund's arm just as the traitor reached the window. The 2 men struggled against the window frame, with Edmund trying desperately to throw himself out while Marcus fought to pull him back into the room. At that moment, the study doors burst open and 5 guards rushed in with swords drawn. They quickly took in the scene and moved to help their captain subdue the struggling traitor. Within moments, Lord Edmund was pinned to the floor with his hands tied behind his back. "Search him thoroughly," Marcus ordered, still breathing hard from the fight and the sleeping powder. "Check for more weapons and any documents he might be carrying." The guards found the poisoned daggers, several lock-picking tools, and most importantly, the leather folder containing what Edmund believed were the real military plans. They also discovered a pouch of gold coins and a letter written in a foreign language that appeared to be instructions from enemy agents. Prince Alexander, despite Captain Marcus's orders to stay in his room, had heard the shouting and fighting from his chambers above. Unable to contain his curiosity and concern, he crept down the stairs and peered around the corner into the study. His young eyes widened as he saw Lord Edmund tied up on the floor, no longer the kind advisor he had known but revealed as a dangerous enemy of the kingdom. "Your Highness," Marcus said sternly when he noticed the prince, "I told you to stay in your room until morning." "I'm sorry, Captain," Alexander replied quietly, "but I heard the fighting and I was worried about you. Is it really over? Is the kingdom safe now?" Marcus looked down at the captured traitor, and then at the evidence of his betrayal spread across the king's desk. "Yes, Your Highness. Thanks to your brave signal this morning, we caught the traitor before he could steal our most important secrets, or escape to enemy territory." Lord Edmund raised his head from the floor, his face twisted with anger and defeat. "You think this changes anything?" He spat at the prince. "I've already given our enemies enough information to destroy this kingdom. Tonight was just supposed to be the final piece." The word sent a chill through everyone in the room. Even captured, Edmund was revealing that the danger to the kingdom was far from over. His betrayal had been going on for months, and enemy armies might already be preparing to attack using the secrets he had provided. Captain Marcus realized that catching the traitor was only the beginning. Now they needed to find out exactly what information Edmund had stolen, who he had been working with, and how much time they had before enemy forces acted on the secrets they had received. "Lock him in the deepest cell in the palace dungeon," Marcus ordered his guards. "Post 4 men to watch him at all times and make sure he has no contact with anyone until the king decides his fate." As the guards dragged Edmund away, the traitor looked back at Prince Alexander with pure hatred in his eyes. "This isn't over, boy," he hissed. "You may have stopped me tonight, but you can't stop what's already in motion." The prince felt a shiver of fear run down his spine, but he stood straight and met Edmund's gaze bravely. The young prince had helped save the kingdom tonight, but he was beginning to understand that much greater challenges lay ahead. Dawn broke over the palace as King Richard listened in stunned silence to Captain Marcus's report. The king sat heavily in his throne, looking much older than his 50 years as he processed the devastating news of his trusted advisor's betrayal. Queen Isabella stood beside him, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder as tears filled her eyes. 15 years, the king whispered, his voice breaking. "I trusted Edmund for 15 years. He ate at our table, advised me on the most important decisions, and played with Alexander when he was small. How could I have been so blind?" Prince Alexander sat quietly in a chair nearby, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. He had barely slept after witnessing Edmund's capture, and his young mind was struggling to understand how someone who seemed so kind could be so evil. Captain Marcus, despite his wounded shoulder and exhaustion from the sleeping powder, stood at attention as he continued his report. "Your Majesty, we've searched Lord Edmund's chambers and found evidence of his betrayal going back at least 8 months. He's been copying military plans, trade agreements, and diplomatic correspondence." The king's face grew pale as he realized the full extent of the damage. "What information did he steal?" How much do our enemies know about our defenses? We're still investigating, Your Majesty. But it appears he had access to the locations of our secret weapon supplies, the schedules of guard rotations, and the layouts of the underground tunnels beneath the palace, Marcus replied grimly. Queen Isabella gasped, understanding immediately what this meant. They could attack the palace directly through the tunnels. They could reach us before our army even knows we're under attack. The king stood up abruptly, his shock transforming into determined anger. Send messages immediately to all our military commanders. Double the guards at every entrance to the tunnels. Station archers on all the palace walls. And bring me Lord Edmund. I want to question him personally. Father, Prince Alexander spoke up quietly, his voice trembling slightly. What Edmund said last night about things already being in motion. What did he mean? Before the king could answer, a guard rushed into the throne room with urgent news. Your Majesty, scouts report that enemy armies are gathering at our northern and eastern borders. They estimate at least 5,000 soldiers, and more arriving every hour. The room fell silent as everyone realized that Edmund's betrayal had already triggered the invasion he had been planning. The stolen information had given enemy kingdoms enough knowledge to coordinate a massive attack on the palace and the capital city. King Richard's face hardened with resolve. How much time do we have before they reach the city? 2 days at most, Your Majesty, the guard replied. They're moving faster than normal because they seem to know exactly which routes to take to avoid our border patrols. The king turned to Captain Marcus. Assemble all available knights and soldiers in the Great Hall within the hour. Send ravens to every allied kingdom requesting immediate military assistance, and prepare the palace for siege defense. As preparations for war began around them, Prince Alexander felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what his discovery had unleashed. By sending that secret signal to Captain Marcus, he had not only exposed a traitor but had also revealed that the kingdom was about to face its greatest battle in decades. Your Highness, Captain Marcus said, approaching the young prince, I need to ask you something important. Last night Lord Edmund looked at you with particular hatred. I'm concerned that even from his prison cell he might try to arrange for someone to harm you. The prince nodded, understanding the danger. What should I do, Captain? Stay close to the palace guards at all times, Marcus replied seriously. Edmund had contacts throughout the kingdom, and some of them might still be loyal to him. Until we know for certain that all his fellow conspirators have been caught, you remain a target. Meanwhile, in the deepest dungeon of the palace, Lord Edmund sat chained to the wall of a cold stone cell. Despite his capture, a cruel smile played across his lips. The guards watching him didn't understand why he seemed so pleased with his situation. But Edmund knew something they didn't. His contact among the enemy kingdoms had told him that if he was ever caught, a special rescue mission would be launched to free him before he could reveal too many secrets under interrogation. This rescue was supposed to happen during the confusion of the main attack on the palace. Edmund also knew that he had one final card to play. Hidden in his cell, sewn into the lining of his coat, was a small device that would allow him to send a signal to enemy agents still operating inside the palace. These agents would receive orders to complete one last mission, the assassination of the royal family during the battle. As the kingdom prepared for war, both sides were planning their final moves in a deadly game where the stakes couldn't be higher. The young prince's brave signal had exposed the immediate threat, but the real battle for the survival of the kingdom was just beginning. In just 2 days, the palace would either stand victorious against the invasion or fall to enemies who knew all of its weaknesses and secrets. And somewhere in that chaos, Lord Edmund was still planning one last betrayal that could destroy everything, even from his prison cell. The attack came at dawn on the second day, just as the scouts had predicted. Enemy armies struck the kingdom from 3 directions simultaneously, using the stolen information to bypass the strongest defenses and target the weakest points in the city walls. The sound of war drums and battle cries echoed across the landscape as thousands of soldiers clashed in desperate combat. From the highest tower of the palace, Prince Alexander watched the battle unfold with a mixture of fear and fascination. Smoke rose from burning buildings in the outer city, and he could see the flash of swords and the flight of arrows as the royal army fought to protect their homeland. Captain Marcus had positioned his best guards around the royal family, knowing that the enemy would try to reach the palace during the chaos of battle. Sure enough, small groups of enemy soldiers were already attempting to infiltrate the underground tunnels that Lord Edmund had revealed to them, but the captain had prepared for this possibility. Using the fake military plans that Edmund had stolen, Marcus had deliberately given the enemies false information about which tunnels were actually passable. Most of the routes the enemies tried to use led to dead ends or chambers that could be easily defended by just a few guards. In his dungeon cell, Lord Edmund heard the sounds of battle and smiled with anticipation. Any moment now, his allies would come to rescue him, and together they would complete their mission to eliminate the royal family. He reached into his coat lining and pulled out the small signaling device he had kept hidden. The device was no bigger than a coin, but when activated, it would send a flash of light visible from certain windows in the palace. This light would tell his remaining agents inside the palace that it was time to strike at the royal family, while everyone was distracted by the external battle. Edmund pressed the device, and a brief bright flash illuminated his cell. Somewhere in the palace above, his signal was received by two servants who had been secretly working for enemy kingdoms for months. These servants had access to the royal chambers and knew exactly where the king, queen, and prince would be during the battle. But what Edmund didn't know was that Captain Marcus had discovered these two servants the previous day during his investigation of the traitors' activities. Instead of arresting them immediately, Marcus had decided to let them move freely while being secretly watched, hoping they would lead him to other conspirators. When the servants received Edmund's signal and began moving toward the royal quarters with concealed weapons, Marcus's guards were ready for them. The two assassins were captured before they could get within 50 feet of the royal family, and their arrest revealed the location of 3 more enemy agents hiding among the palace staff. As the battle raged outside, King Richard made a crucial decision that would determine the outcome of the war. Using information that his loyal spies had gathered about enemy troop movements, he ordered a surprise counterattack on the enemy command post located in the hills overlooking the city. Prince Alexander, despite his parents' concerns for his safety, convinced his father to let him participate in defending the palace. The young prince had proven his courage and intelligence by exposing Lord Edmund's betrayal, and the king realized that his son was ready to take on greater responsibilities. Armed with a sword and protected by 2 of Captain Marcus's most trusted guards, Alexander helped defend the main entrance to the palace when a group of enemy soldiers managed to breach the outer courtyard. The prince fought bravely, using the combat skills his tutors had taught him and showing the same sharp thinking that had led him to discover the traitor. By midday, the tide of battle began to turn in favor of the kingdom. The false information from Edmund's stolen documents had confused and divided the enemy forces, while the royal army's counterattacks had disrupted their coordination. Allied kingdoms had also responded to the king's call for help, sending reinforcements that arrived just in time to join the fight. As enemy forces began to retreat, Captain Marcus led a final assault on their command post. In the enemy commander's tent, the captain found detailed plans showing how Lord Edmund's information had been used to plan the invasion. There were also letters revealing the names of other enemy agents in neighboring kingdoms, information that would help prevent future attacks. By sunset, the battle was over. The kingdom had survived the invasion, thanks largely to the fake military plans that had misled the enemy armies. The city walls still stood strong, the palace was secure, and the royal family was safe. In his dungeon cell, Lord Edmund realized that his final plan had failed when no rescue came and no news arrived of the royal family's assassination. His years of betrayal had ultimately accomplished nothing except to strengthen the kingdom's defenses and expose other enemy agents. King Richard visited the traitor in his cell that evening, looking down at the man who had once been like a brother to him. "Your invasion failed, Edmund. Your agents were captured, your false information led your allies into traps, and your kingdom is stronger than ever." Edmund looked up with defeat in his eyes, finally understanding that his betrayal had been turned against him. "How did you know the military plans were fake?" The king smiled grimly. "Because my son is braver and smarter than you ever realized." When Alexander told us what he had seen, Captain Marcus had time to prepare. "We replaced the real documents with false ones, set traps for your agents, and used your own stolen information to defeat your allies." Prince Alexander stepped forward, standing tall beside his father. "The secret signal you taught me about loyalty and protecting the kingdom, grandfather's lessons about the royal code, they helped me do the right thing even when I was afraid." Lord Edmund closed his eyes, knowing that his fate was sealed. The young prince he had underestimated had not only exposed his betrayal but had also played a crucial role in saving the kingdom. As the royal family returned to the palace, Alexander reflected on everything that had happened since that morning when he sent his secret signal. His brave decision to trust Captain Marcus had led to the capture of a dangerous traitor, the defeat of an invading army, and the protection of his family and kingdom. The young prince had learned that sometimes the most important battles are won not with swords and armies, but with courage, intelligence, and the wisdom to know who can be trusted. And most importantly, he had discovered that even someone as young as 16 could make a difference when the fate of a kingdom hung in the balance.